Hello, this is Eric. This is my co-host Jared. Say hello.
Hey, hello.
Uh, and we're going to be talking about um the political polarization as it relates to electoral systems. This is my capstone, and that was the topic I chose: electoral systems in as it relates to political polarization. Um, I'm just gonna throw some acronyms out there. FPTP, first past the post, STV, single transferable vote, MMP, mixed member proportional, RCV, ranked choice voting. Um, these are all very easy ways to distill down a topic into like a quick like three-letter thing. And it's useful for that. But the topic I want to focus on is education, because education I think on this topic is lacking. That's kind of the key cornerstone of my whole like survey and project and everything I did, was because I knew that as a student I wasn't really conducting a true like research like survey, and like I wasn't really going to ever have a really representative experimental and control group for what I was trying to do. I knew that that wasn't possible. I knew that I couldn't achieve that because I'm just a student, and that wasn't really the design of this course and this project anyways. It was meant to be more like a test on how it works, rather than for me to be able to be like, I figured this thing out and now I get to write like a whole big thing about it. It's gonna get published everywhere. That's not the point. And so I kind of want to just take this informative route about something I care about a lot, something I've always cared about a lot. Really, since I got into politics, I've thought that voting systems are kind of this thing that people don't talk about because it's not a flashy political issue. It's not like an abortion debate. It's not like a gun control debate. It's not about like wage slavery and capitalism or like free markets or anything. It's not something that's easy to stick like a flag down in, right? And like really make a big statement about, and people will get raring about like their side versus the other side. Most political issues are like this. This isn't. It's just not flashy. It's not interesting. It has the same level I think of like people want to talk about it as like balancing the budget, right? It's like, okay, who cares? Like no one cares. Um, but I think it is something that people don't really think about, but it has a huge effect. We'll get into that in a second. But I mean, when I want to ask you, when you think about politics, how often do you think of it in like the macro scale of the way I'm voting is very impactful? I'm assuming you don't, right?
No, I don't really think about it, and I think like most people, we just kind of like accept the system
Yeah,
that it's there as it is, and it's so old, relatively speaking, at this point that it's like, well, this is how the system's been, just
yeah.
how it is.
And it's kind of like the way I like to explain first past the post. We'll start with that because that's what the U.S. has. That's a system that I'm criticizing a lot and trying to explain better alternatives to. Um, on the surface, I've always said that first past the post is the kind of thing that if you were designing, like I'm a writer, I like to design games to relate to my writing, and it's the kind of thing with if I'm rushing to like make like I don't know a system, I don't think about it too much. It's the kind of system that would immediately come to mind. It's like you're voting, right? So let's see, we're just gonna have it. Whoever gets the most votes wins, right? And that makes sense when you don't think about it too much. And especially if you say you grow up in a country where that's how you vote, that's just to you that's voting. You don't think about it as like, well, you could vote differently. How else would you vote differently? You just vote, and the person who gets the most votes should win, right? Makes sense. But then you get into like the very famous example is the Belfast South district in Northern Ireland in the member of parliament election in 2010, I believe. It is in the UK, obviously. Um, and the winner, Alistair McDonnell, he got 24.5% of the total vote in that district. But he won because there was no. In this case, there's enough parties running. I actually want to quickly explain that. There's this term called the Virgers Law about first past the post. It's a misleading term. It's one people kind of make fun of in political science a little bit because they call it a law, but it's almost completely disproven immediately by parliamentary systems. So basically, what it is that a first past the post system like we have in the United States will not allow for third parties because they would do the spoiler effect, which is that they would if you vote for them, say if you vote for the Libertarians, you're throwing away your vote and allowing the and making it so what could have been a vote for the Republicans is now just wasted, and that basically makes it so your side gets less votes overall. It basically saying that third parties can exist because they're not viable. They only exist as a way to be kind of a throwaway vote. And that's true in a presidential system like we have. The problem is first past the post also exists in parliamentary systems. In a parliamentary system, because of how a parliament works, you can have blocks, right? and voting blocks, and so you can have a coalition government, and that's a part of like how the whole system works is coalitions. So you can vote in, say, the UK for somebody that you know, is of a third party, and that's viable. But there's still this core issue coming back to the Belfast South district that you can win when most people didn't want you to, right? So I'm not even when I say that I talk about, let's say, in the United States, the Electoral College. That's something we'll come back to later, but that's not really the point I'm making. And the point I'm making is like saying a congressional district, right? Maybe it wins 52% people voted Democrat, but like that's barely a majority, and that's a lot of people not being represented by their votes, right? When a president wins in the country, I mean, they have to be, the voice of all Americans. But we don't really view Congress that way, right? In the same way as this one guy, Alistair McDonald, gets to represent an entire county or whatever it is that they base these districts on in Northern Ireland, despite not even getting a quarter of the vote, right? He only got a quarter. Actually, a less, 24.5. And he gets to represent everybody because no one else had more than him, right? And so when you have this issue of if you only need to have more, this can get really hairy, like here, right? But in general, that's not something you'll see in America, but you'll see it in different ways, right? And I think that what I just want to kind of explain is that if you want your system to be politically representative, you need everyone, for the most part, to somehow be represented mathematically, right? So if I'm looking mathematically at any congressional district, even ones that are like 80-20, right? That's still 1/5 that have no say, right? They don't have a say in the out. They might have a say in the outcome in the sense that they voted, but they don't get represented, right, by the outcome, right? And so the issue with that is that if you split this across the entire country, there's a lot of people who don't get represented. I don't have the raw stats on this to give you an exact number, but I would imagine it's upwards of 40% of the population probably are in districts that probably are pretty not really swingy, probably pretty hard one way. They don't have much say. I know anecdotally when I did my interviews, something that came up quite often was I live in a state where it's always going to go one direction, so I didn't vote in the general, because why would I? The Electoral College kind of makes that pointless. That's just as true, if not more true, for congressional districts, depending on where you live, right? Obviously, California is a huge state. I don't think I need to tell you that. But California will have more Republicans in California than most Republican states have, just by how many people are there. But those people on election day don't get represented. Republicans in New York City districts, another example for congressional stuff, they don't get represented because there's so many people in those dense populated areas, and a lot of them are Democrats, but there's a decent amount of Republicans that will never have a say. And well, I think it's easy to take the politically expedient route of saying, well, I just want my side to win. I don't want the other side to win, so it makes sense, for in this situation, I don't care. And I can say, sure. I mean, from a practical standpoint, that makes sense. But the problem is, if you're a Republican, you should be really concerned about those Republican votes that get thrown away in a state like California or New York. And if you're a Democrat, you should care a lot about those Democrat votes that really don't get to have much of a say in a state like Texas, which is becoming more and more of a swing state. There is a reason for both sides to care about this. And I think data will show this. I've looked at my survey results by now, spoiler. And obviously, I've done my interviews. And while they're truly, obviously not representative samples, I knew going in that these would be questions, and I'll say them to you now, that almost anyone would obviously agree yes to. So, if you had taken my survey, I would have asked you, say, do you think it is important to a democracy for there to be viable third parties? And of course, you're going to say yes.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and most people are just going to say yes to that because it's like it's a loaded question, obviously, but that's kind of the point, right? This is a loaded topic. It's one that I think, if given the information, anyone would be like, yeah, this voting system sounds kind of whack, bro. Like, maybe we shouldn't use it. Like, I would like for people to be represented. Like, another question I asked was like, do you think it's important for everybody like minus, like obvious like caveats like the Nazis or something, but like everybody to have a voice and say and be represented. And everyone's gonna say like you would say now, yes, because
Yes.
who is against representation in a
Even
democracy?
if your opinion or your statement I don't agree with or maybe isn't even correct, yeah, it still deserves to be heard to some extent.
Yeah, and like the point is that um the system doesn't give that. And so when I did my survey, that was the trick of my survey. I asked all these questions, a lot of them loaded questions like that were just, they sounded like I was sampling for opinions on them. I already knew the answer I was getting. I knew that almost nobody was going to say no to those questions. Because, like, they're obvious answers. Almost everyone, unless they're a complete ideologue, is going to say yes to that. Uh, Anyone who's not like so completely smitten with like the two-party system is going to say that yeah, I think third parties should exist and be viable, right? A lot, even like I think this is one of those few issues I think is completely bipartisan. That I think most people just agree that it's not good. The system isn't good. Um, but the problem is that I just don't think enough people know about the alternatives. There's actually another trick question I laid into my interviews and my surveys, when I asked people if they know what first past the post was. I could ask you that right now. Do you know what first past the post is? And if you weren't around me for all these years, you would probably say no.
No.
And the trick of it is, when I asked it on my survey, I've asked, have you heard, which of these voting systems have you heard of? I knew I would get a response where the majority had not heard of first past the post. I knew that was going to happen. But it's the one they use. It's the one they vote in, right? Like the one America uses on every level, besides a couple states or districts that use ranked choice voting, use it. And for most Americans, that's all they understand is voting, and they don't even know it has a name. They don't have any knowledge about this topic, and that's not their fault, obviously. I think education has drastically failed. When I was doing research for this, something that came up over and over was that ranked choice voting in a place that's been implemented in America is actually proved not ineffective in the sense it's not a better system, but people don't understand it. And it's like not a hard system to grasp. It is the easiest, probably, of almost all of the alternate forms of voting besides first past the post. I mean, it's really, you rank them. Me and you did this in 5th grade when we went to Nature's classroom, and they asked us which of our friends we wanted to share a room with while we were there. And it was like, you would pick them, and then the teacher would take all of these and they would like put them all together, and the most common denominators would get put together. And that's just how it works, right? That's basically the same thing, right? I ranked my choices, you ranked your choices, and then we got put with people, right?
Oh yeah.
That's how ranked
The
choice
best
voting
of their
works. Yeah, to
abilities.
the best of their abilities, and obviously having to make some accommodations in there and stuff. But generally speaking, that's how it ended up working out. Um, that's just, it's basically the same thing in ranked choice voting, right? But people were confused about it, which I think speaks to, if you're going to implement something, maybe you need to explain to people better. I think education on political literacy is clearly lacking in this country. I don't think many people would disagree with that. Even people who don't realize they're one of the problems there would probably still not disagree with that because they don't realize it either. But I think overall the issue is this lack of education on all other alternatives, right? It's very easy when presented with, like, I don't know, present me with a common political issue.
Um, Common political issue is, I would say, the growing cost of like just like the necessity to live, but then like stagnating wages across the board for
Yeah.
everybody.
Okay. So stagnant wages. It's pretty obvious what people are gonna say there. Well, someone's just like, no, it's not an issue, or like we need to do something about it, or like we need to do something about it. It's like, but the answer is this, or the answer is this, right? Like you already can see how this is gonna break down, right? If you look at gun control as another prime example, it's like, well, I'm either in favor of it or I'm against it, or like maybe I'm just completely unsure and I don't know why I voted in the first place. It's like you can already see where it's going before it gets to that place. It's different with I think this whole issue because people don't even know what the options are, right? Most people just don't know there's these other options. I think that's in part due to the complexity of them. I think the simplicity of first past the post is its basically one and only strength, in my opinion. I think that when looking at first past the post and how it works in America, it's very easy for me to just roll up on election day or whatever election day it is. Maybe it's the midterms, maybe it's like a local election, maybe it's a presidency, right? And be like, well, casting my ballot, done. Simple as that, right? I mean, and I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to understand how this stuff works, and it's easy on election day to kind of understand, even with the complex electoral college system, because all I really need to know is this state has this many points, and I need to win that state, and then like
Mhm.
this has this many, and I have to kind of count them up and kind of just like play a little tiny bit of game theory in my head to figure out what's important, right? For winning on election day. And it's not complicated. The electoral college isn't even complicated. It's obviously more complicated than popular vote
Oh
by
yeah.
a lot, but popular vote is basically just looking at two numbers and asking which is bigger. So it's not exactly a complex thing to understand on
You don't
election
need to
day.
be a mathematician or have a degree in mathematics
Yeah,
to look at.
yeah, you don't. Even with the big numbers that they get up to, it's still at the end of the day pretty
Most
easy.
kindergartens could tell you a million's bigger than 100.
Yeah,
Like
and especially because most like the websites or news channels you look at will have it be like a bar graph or something, and one will be higher than the other, or will be like a pie chart, and one will have more space. And it's like,
oh
well, I can also just I have like the ability to observe space. I can see which thing is bigger or smaller, so I don't even need to count. Sometimes, a lot of times, I can just like look and be like, bigger thing that is winning, smaller thing that is losing. Right? It's kind of simple. But it's hard to like conceptualize. I didn't ask this. Maybe it could have been a cool question. I'm thinking about it now to ask somebody. But in my interviews, how would you envision another voting system working besides the one you already know? I think that would have given a lot of people pause to figure out another way to vote. It would be like, huh, how could you do it differently? And so that's what we're gonna get into now, right? So I'll start with I'll start with the one that's closest to the one we already have, ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting, I don't really view much as its own voting system in of itself. It's more of an enhancement of the system, especially because a lot of the other proportionally representative voting systems um, they already incorporate to some degree. Like single transferable vote already incorporates to some degree ranked choice voting, anyways, right? Mixed member proportional doesn't, but it's also not proportionally representative. It's like a mixed system, hence the name. Um, so ranked choice voting, I think like that's the one that I think is obviously the easiest to implement because it already is implemented in this country in places, right? It's not massively. It's only like a small couple places, but that's certainly more than any other one is. Um, I think I mean like and that those were also by the way the ranked voting was if you remember the ones that confused people and it's the simplest one, which is kind of the whole point of this, right? Educating
yeah.
people. But so that one I don't really feel like covering much because like I said, is there. It's an enhancement of the system. It has most of the same issues, assuming you're not replacing it with and putting it on layering it on top of something else. It has a lot of the same issues as First Past the Post has. It just makes it slightly better, right? That's fine.
But then it brings in some of its own issues too, because then you're
Yeah,
not getting the true representation you
yeah,
may want.
you're
You're
still not
getting
getting
your
yeah
next best thing.
yeah you're still getting what First Past the Post gives you. Not it's not representative, but it
It's
get
like going to an ice cream store and you want vanilla, but all they have
mm,
is chocolate. So you're like, well, I do like chocolate ice cream, but I
yeah
guess that's vanilla.
yeah. It's like at the end of the day, the system lets you rank which ones you want, and you might get one of the choice, and it might work in such a way where you might get an option you prefer, right? Because it lets me pick like rank my candidates, and I'm like, if this guy doesn't win, even though he's like my favorite, he probably won't win. My vote still goes to the other guy. So it like lets me kind of vote for third parties, kinda. I mean, like in practice, I don't. They're still not really viable. The system doesn't really reward them for existing. They're not gonna have the funding in a system that doesn't really reward them, especially because with ranked choice voting, maybe if it was a widespread in like every district in the country, it might be a little bit better. But when it's only in some, the candidates that are part of the big parties that can actually donate to them and have the big letter that everyone cares about next to their name, D or R, then they're probably gonna get a lot of funding. I doubt the guy running for the Socialist Party or the Libertarian Party or the Green Party is gonna get a lot of funding because he's from a small or they or she are from a small party, right? In what's probably like a district in Maine or Nebraska, because I'm pretty sure those are the only places that have it. I could be wrong. I don't remember, but that's the ones I remember having it. I know Maine does, in a lot of places. I think, if not statewide. But that's my point. It's an enhancement. It's not a fix. It's an enhancement. It makes it better. Maybe if it was unilateral, it may make it a lot better, but it's still the weakest alternative. I think it's the easiest alternative, though, and I think that is the strength of it. I think it's the easiest one to get people to understand, the closest one to our already existing system, so it requires the least amount of adaptation. I think it's politically the most feasible. But the whole point of this isn't really to be like, well, I'm going to take the easy way out and pick the one that I could most easily get past because I'm an idealist and I don't really care what's the easiest. Because the easiest probably won't happen anyways. So what's the point? Let's talk about what is best in the first place. And so that brings us to the next one. We'll start with mixed member proportional because that's not proportional representation, but it's closer and it's a lot better than anything else that we've talked about so far, right? So mixed member proportional. It's interesting, and when I describe it to you, I want you to kind of be like, "Wow, yeah, that's a weird system, right?" Because I asked earlier if you could have made one up. I obviously didn't really ask you to do that, but like,
Yeah.
because it's late, and anyways, the point is that this is like a kind of convoluted system, but I like it a lot, and so the way it works basically is you get 2 votes in an election day. Now, if you tell someone you get 2 votes, they're all like, oh, wait, it's all like making all these question marks come up in their head and like, wait, 2? How does that work? Do I just get to vote twice? Not really, right? I mean, it's kind of an oversimplification. You don't really have 2 votes in the sense that you can vote for 2 different people or you can vote for the same guy twice. It's not like that. It doesn't just double your voting power. The way it works is you're gonna vote on election day, and you're gonna do everything the same as first past the post already is. You're gonna vote for the guy you like. Maybe we could implement ranked choice voting in there. You could still do that and implement ranked choice voting inside of this. Like I said, it's more of an enhancement than a system in of itself. So you can apply it to other things. It's key to some other ones, but for mixed member proportional, you don't have to have it, but you probably should, right? Because it's better than not having it. But with mixed member proportional, you cast your vote, and so far it's the same. But you also get to cast that second vote, and that second vote goes for a political party. And so what's important about that is that immediately being able to vote for a party, or just anybody, right, and still getting to vote for a candidate means I get to vote for the most politically feasible candidate, but I also get to vote for my favorite party, which might not be politically feasible, might be much closer to my personal views. That's huge. Now, the other thing this does is mixed member proportional is also proportional. What it does is it takes the system, and it looks at all the votes, and let's say there's like 5 parties. Make it easy for the first example, and each person gets like 20% of the vote, even split. What probably happens here? Let's say that they've allotted in this district. There's gonna be 5 winning people, right? And let's say, I guess that it's a kind of lame example. I'll change that actually a little bit. Let's say it's 33%. There will be 3 candidates, so you need 33% to win, and like one guy gets like I don't know 44, other guy gets like 33, and like another guy gets like I don't know 20. I'm bad at giving up examples. That's not the point. I'm bad at that part. We're not gonna talk about that. Let's forget I said that. The point is that if there's like 3 set candidates that can win amount for that area, there'll be a threshold that they should meet, and those will get elected. That's the idea. I went out of the way to make this overly complicated. It was stupid of me. Forget that part. Don't dock points for that. But the point is, yeah, that you have multiple people getting elected, and the whole point of that is to make it look kind of proportional. And then you have that second part come in, right? The second vote from those parties. And when you vote for those political parties, what happens is those parties get to then pick their own people to fill those seats, those extra seats that exist. And so once we go through and we allot all of this together, we will have if you look at say like what the election map breakdown was, and then what it looks like after you implement this, it will look as close to possible with rounding, of course, like to what the people actually want. And so that's the point of it, right? It enables smaller third parties. It also kills gerrymandering, because
Mhm.
it becomes pointless. Because when something's proportionally representative, gerrymandering isn't helpful because all gerrymandering does is guarantee you majority wins, right? But if people are still getting elected out of that, it's functionally not very useful. Um, but so yeah, that's kind of the big strengths of mixed member proportional. I mean, I'll ask you like what you think about that system, I guess.
I think it's pretty interesting. The big strength that I kind of like about it is that like the best thing about it is with that 2 vote. If let's say the most popular candidate wins,
Mm-hmm.
now that you've moved on to the party, for example, whatever, there that candidate can't be elected for 2 seats.
Yeah.
Basically. So basically it means, all right, so we're going to get more representation of potentially smaller parties or more focused parties. So instead of like saying, okay, everybody's just either Democrat or Republican, you've got more focus like, hey, there's the Socialist Party, maybe they have a little bit more say in swinging things, and then
Mm-hmm.
parties in when in on the more higher level, like Congress or the Senate, let's say for the United States, have to now work with some of these other parties to when it comes to in order to get things passed instead of just saying, well, it's all us or all them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like
Yeah.
there's a little bit more nuanced and like decision making there because you have to make policies that work to strive your things, but maybe we'll have to help it. You'll have to get other people on board with it by
Yeah.
helping them with their policy.
Yeah, it's basically like what parliamentary governments are already like with
Mm-hmm.
coalitions. We have that
Correct. Yeah.
sort of in presidential systems, the caucuses. People caucus together. It's unofficial, of course. The caucuses aren't written into the system. It's more so, well, it's how it works in other democracies. Let's kind of emulate that, right? But this makes it a lot more of a, not more formal, but it makes it more obvious, right? Like if part of the people that are getting elected are somewhat ideologically similar to you, are one of these smaller parties, you want to work with their party to overtake the other coalition parties, right? And while there might not be coalition governments, there's coalition representation, and that's the point. It's not about making a socialist or an anarchist or somebody that's right wing that isn't a fascist that is somehow different. I'm not getting into that. But the point is making other political ideologies feasible for elections, not necessarily for president, but to get them in Congress, right? To get them in your local assemblies, to get them in your state senate, to get them as senators, right? It makes it all easier. Executive branches are a little bit different. You can't really proportionally represent in an executive position. Now you can kind of, and I'll get to that in a second. But my point is that like no one's trying to be like we elect like 5 presidents, right? With this system. Now that would be more representative, but it's more of a council than a president anymore, right? But I will
Yeah.
ask you, because there are countries that have more than one head of state, in the sense that like they literally have more than one executive that gets elected. How would you imagine that works?
I honestly, the way I kind of think about it, kind of how it would work. I don't know if this is correct, but I kind of think of it kind of like the Supreme Court, where you have X amount of things, and then they have to make a decision on a topic. And so in the Supreme Court, you have I believe it's 7 judges. If you're wrong with that,
9. There's 9.
nine. But you have to have you have to have if for something to pass, it has to be at least 5 of the 4. It
Yeah.
has to be a majority. So that's what I assume it would have to be in that scenario where it is the majority of them have to agree on it. So if there is like, and then ideally in a council situation like that, if you want proper representation, you would probably be like, all right, well, 10% of the country is this party, so they get 1 representative. 20% is this, if there's like 10 you're electing 10 people, for example. You would probably want to pick like an odd number, so you always have to have a situation where it's like, it's either yes or no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're basically spot on. And that is democracy, isn't it? People making decisions with each other and
Mm-hmm.
coming to a majority outcome. Now, of course, their decisions aren't proportional, but that's not the point. So yeah, so I can't get into the nitty gritty because I don't truly know the nitty gritty of, for instance, Swiss politics, of Lebanese politics, or Bosnian politics. That's the main ones that come to mind of having this system. But
Mm-hmm.
Lebanon's a little bit different. Lebanon doesn't actually, I don't think, have an executive council. They have mandated split between ethnic and religious groups, where like one, I think maybe it rotates, but as far as I know, it's like the Marmonites get the presidency. I think the Shia get the lead, like the assembly leader, and whatever the third, like I don't know, exactly remember all their exact positions, but you get the idea. It's split in Bosnia. In Switzerland, there's like more of an executive council, in the sense that they rotate. So there will still be a president at any given time, but there's also an executive council that you were describing. So the addition here is that there is an actual head of state at any given time, but you elect a bunch at once. So like you get like with like the Swiss, I think it's like 10. There's like 10 presidents at once, but only one is actually acting at any given time, and the rest is all done with the council collectively. Right? Is my understanding. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what we're trying to talk about here. That I just want to give a quick like little side note about how it could work with executive branch, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the legislative branch, right? And so when looking at representing people, you want to try and make it as proportional to the population in any given district. And then with mixed member proportional, what it's doing is it's taking those belief structures as well. So the party you most identify with, right? For me, I don't identify much with the Democratic Party. I vote with them because that's the only thing viable, because I don't like Republicans basically at all. right? But they don't represent my views as like a socialist, etc. Like
Mhm.
they're pro-capitalist. I'm not. Right? It's an inherent part of the liberal politics is capitalism. Not the point. I'm not going to get into that right now. But the point is, I don't feel represented, but I vote for them because that's how the system works as a two-party system. If I was in this system, I would be able to cast a ballot for the Socialist Party or whatever, the Democratic Socialists of America, like whatever, whoever comes and forms a new party to kind of be a more minor party, right? I could vote for them, and I would still be able to make sure that the Republican doesn't get elected because I could put my vote in for the Democrat, but I could also get some more representation of my closer to my views, right? And so that's the idea of that, and it also secondarily makes it so the people who are losing the election, so don't get their guy in, still get their guys in. We just get more of our guys in, right? So if it's a 60-40 split, maybe like 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, that would work. You would get that, right? You get that split, and then we get the other ones in the secondary part, which is the picking the party, right? So that's kind of how that works. It's a mixed system. That's what the name is. It still has first past the post inherent to it because that's the first stage, but the proportional part comes from how we utilize the system that we've created to fill the extra seats, right? After the person who obviously won wins. Um, so then there's single transferable vote, and this is the one I want to focus on the most because this is the one that people liked the most. From number one, in my interviews, but also when I was doing research, it seemed to be the one that researchers were saying seemed to be the most effective. Uh, which is interesting because I actually don't know if it exists anywhere. Mixed member proportional does. It's in New Zealand and it's in Germany. Completely across both countries. It's in other countries. Those are obviously the ones you want to look to. They're the most effective of
Mhm.
it because they have the strongest democracies of anyone that have it. Um, Single transferable vote though is interesting. So it utilizes a lot of runoff elections. Now, if you're trying to do a first past the post system, this is a little side I want to make. You should still have runoff elections. It's kind of crazy that we don't really utilize them much in American democracy. Um, it would allow us, to have. I mean, we kind of have in the sense of how primaries work, I guess. But in terms of like runoff voting, to make sure that like we get down to those 2 candidates, it would probably be a little bit better, maybe, than what we have. Not really the point. But in single transferable vote, you have, let's say you have 5 candidates, and the whole goal is to cross a certain threshold, right? And so let's say it's 33% you need to have of the quorum to get elected. And so what we keep doing is maybe like of the 5 candidates, only 3 can get elected. And so we do the ranked choice aspect where you rank your candidates. And so when yours loses, everyone that's in that block, their next choice gets transferred. And so their vote gets transferred around. And so the way this works basically is we can keep electing. So we're still electing multiple people, so it's proportional because that's the whole point. But also, we're transferring the vote around to make sure that the people who voted get their choice heard. And so when I was doing interviews, the thing that came up was this specific thing was that even in mixed member proportional, it could still kind of feel like your vote was getting wasted. Now, your second vote might have felt pretty good, but your first vote could kind of feel bad. Whereas in single transferable vote, you always know that your vote will get transferred to somebody you like. Now, if there's enough candidates running and there's enough transfers, then technically that might not happen, right? You could eventually get to that one guy you don't like that might be ideologically close, but that's not really the point, right? The point is that ideologically similarly, you can get yours will get passed around, and you don't have to worry about not supporting what's it called? This one big candidate. The nice thing about this too is when you let it expand outwards, right? Um, it will still enable third parties because now that we have a system that elects more than one candidate, sure you can say the big parties can run more than one candidate, but there's less stopping them from running third parties. Because in truth, the only reason we don't have third parties in America is because everyone knows you can't get them to win, right? I mean, only people like I've never really met somebody who is like I vote Green Party because I literally believe that Howie Hawkins can win the presidency. People don't think that. They vote that way because they don't like the 2 parties. They don't vote that way because they think
And they
that
still
guy
want to
can
say
really.
they voted.
Yeah, exactly. They want to be involved in the process, but they don't want to vote for the parties they don't like. Um, that changes this changes that, right? You do get to vote for the person you like and the parties you like. and maybe your guy doesn't win. Maybe your guy is so obscure that he can't make it in like the 3 people getting elected out of the 5, right? But you still get to you can still vote for him, and maybe he does have a shot if enough people like him. Maybe he's not as fringe as you think he is. Maybe he does get elected. Maybe that happens. At the very least, you're not worried about throwing your vote away because you get to put it on other people as well, right? And so that's single transferable vote. Those are the main systems, and I want to move into like the quick part 2 about some other tertiary things that I think are important to talk about when talking about electoral politics in America and electoral
Mhm.
systems. Gerrymandering already came up, so we'll start there. Gerrymandering I mean, most people know what it is, but it's rigging kind of elections by drawing boundaries in a way where it's specifically partisan gerrymandering I'm talking about right now, where you draw the boundary in a way where you group people together based on voting trends and habits and what you already know about these voters. You can effectively geographically relocate everybody into voting districts that you can almost effectively know are going to go a certain way, right? I can pump it up to where there's always like a 65% amount of Republicans, and maybe I make like a throwaway district that I know is going to just go the other party, like Democrat or something, right? I can do that. And that's not that crazy. That's kind of what's been happening in the American South since the last couple of censuses. So when Republicans gain control. And they can effectively keep a lot less representation of the other party out of power. That's not to say Democrats don't do it, but like most things, the Democrats are a lot worse at it than the Republicans are. So unfortunate. There are states though that do some more like bipartisan gerrymandering. So New York, we live in a state that does that.
Mhm.
They try to draw boundaries that favor incumbents, favor people already elected, across party lines. And you might be wondering, well, it's like, okay, well, why would they want that? Why? And I'll ask you, why do you think why would the Democrats want to give the Republicans that? Why would it be like, okay, we're gonna make sure your guys still keep getting elected? It sounds weird, right? But why do you think they would do it? Because there is a
Because
reason.
then they know they can say, "Hey, but here we want to have our guy keep getting elected," or
It's kind of
something
that.
similar.
It's somewhat similar to that. So not quite, but yeah, you're kind of hitting on it a bit. So the thing you have to understand, this is something you might not, a lot of people don't grasp, especially about like I say like New York, is that while New York is a very very heavily blue state in terms of the way we think about it, we always get 2 blue senators, we're majority Democrat, and we always vote blue in the presidential elections. That's all true. The assembly is not always Democrat in
Oh
New
yeah,
York. I don't know if you know that, but
I do know
the
that.
assembly
Yes.
does not stay blue, and that's because the way voting districts work, we don't draw voting districts and make them all equal in population. If we did, maybe it would be a bit different. I don't know. I don't know enough to say that, but the point would be that in a lot of our districts that are blue, are very blue, also have like a lot of our population in them, like all the New York City districts. New York City carries the state blue, right? And sure, obviously, urban versus rural is also another thing at
Mhm.
play. But New York City has not nearly as many districts as it has people, right? So it's not able to carry the state legislature all on its own, like you would think it might, um, and how it does in statewide elections, like for senator, for governor, and for president, right? This doesn't work the same. Um, and so Democrats are in this weird position. We're in a very blue state that they sometimes lose the assembly to, and I don't know. I'm thinking maybe the Senate, the state Senate. I don't know. But and so they've gone about a system where it makes sense for instead of one party ever gaining control and making the census to be super bad for the other party, instead, they just kind of agree that we're gonna rig it for ourselves, and we don't need to worry about the other party gaining control and writing us out of viability. We will just agree to make it good for everybody, and we can all have the party, and sure as hell not letting anybody else get elected. And so that's kind of the idea, right? So that's why bipartisan gerrymandering exists. I think there's an argument that it's worse. I think that in terms of actual impact it has, it's not as bad because it's not as
Mhm.
common. And I think it's more of a problem with just political elite in general staying in power than it is really an issue of representation to me. But it's definitely something that should be talked about. That's why I brought it up. Um, Gerrymandering. The point being here is that first past the post, everyone hates it, right? I'm getting ahead of myself. Everybody hates it. When I did my survey, like nobody was like gerrymandering. That's awesome. I love that stuff. Everyone was like, no, not really not. I can't say I'm a fan because let's be real. You're kind of like you're psychotic levels of partisan when you're like gerrymandering good, right? I mean, you gotta be a little bit on the
You're,
Kool-Aid
you're
to get
either
that
that
far.
or your party's so in control that
Yeah,
you want the gerrymander to stay the way it was. So you're,
yeah. It's more so that
but
like
those are just so extreme.
even if you like your party and would want them to gerrymander, like I'm not technically against Democrats gerrymandering. I just think nobody should be allowed to in the first place,
Oh yeah.
which is kind of the more broad point. But you're not going to get people who actively say gerrymandering is awesome and we should keep it, right? So most people agree it's bad, but the kind of issue of gerrymandering that's the very obvious issue. It's like, okay, so let's make it illegal. Okay, how do you do that? Well, ignoring the courts who refuse to hear a case on it, uh, you'd have to get. Oh wait, yeah, that is the issue. You'd have to get the people who gerrymander to vote so they weren't allowed to do that anymore. That
What's that
seems,
gonna do?
yeah, it seems to be a classic case of huge goddamn conflict of interest, isn't it? People aren't gonna vote to take away their own power. That's kind of crazy. It's literally asking the king to vote to get rid of his crown. Why would he do that? Why would he just give up his crown? He's not gonna do that. They're not gonna do that. So like I said, it kind of falls on the courts or us to maybe. I mean, it still relies on them to do this, but there's some ways around it, which is like an alternative voting system that will make gerrymandering unviable, right? Um, Now you might be hard pressed to get a lot of state assemblies to want to do this, but the fact remains, and I do think this is true, there is much more of a reason for a state like senator across party lines or state assemblyman across party lines to want to do this than there would be in Congress. Because if you for your state can get something like proportional representation or that gets rid of gerrymandering, like that to me, when I hear that, that's the ticket to like getting much more well known. That's a ticket to like a Senate run, maybe a presidency run at some point, right? Which if you're like a politician, right, who cares if your state becomes a little bit one more like one way than the other? You're gonna have like some of the most immense political cred you could have, and it requires doing something that's good for both parties, right? So it looks good to the public who want to see bipartisan support for something, right? It just it works really well politically. I think that now not to say it doesn't have its cons. Obviously, it still requires you to, for some extent, give up some power, right? Which is a reason you don't see it. But we still are seeing it on state levels and not at all on the national, which is why I bring it up as being a distinction there. Um, all of this comes with a caveat that I'm not even that expectant of anything like this ever be happening in America. This is more of me just trying to educate people that maybe we could try and do something about it, right? And hoping that maybe they'll tell somebody and it spreads. That's always the hope when you try to talk about a political issue in my mind, because I don't think right now it's at all feasible, even on a state level, to really say that like we're gonna get single transferable voter MMP or something as a part of it. I think gerrymandering is a huge reason why that's not happening, right? And
Mhm.
so something that gets rid of that would be great because gerrymandering to me is one of the worst parts of the American system. It's like if you show like a European or someone from Asia or like Oceania and then you show them gerrymandering, they'll like they'll probably look at you and be like, that's classic American democracy at work for you, right? Like America and their really stupid, convoluted, doesn't really function democracy, right? Okay, and speaking of democracy that doesn't function, let's talk about the Electoral College because, as it turns out, a Republican has only won one election in the last 22 years, nationally. I mean, for president, uh, by getting the popular vote, and that was Bush in 2004. So, in the last 18 years, the Republicans have not won the presidency by winning the popular vote, and that's because of the Electoral College. Now I'll say the Electoral College gets a little bit of an unfair reputation. Um, I don't think it didn't make sense at the time it was made. Now, that's not to say it isn't elitist. It is an elitist system. But the reason it existed, and people kind of overlook it to kind of criticize it a lot, is they needed to have a balance of power of some degree when the colonies were formed and the Constitution was being signed to get rid of the Argos and Confederation for any of this to happen in the first place. We
Mhm.
needed something that balanced it out a bit. And at the time, because this is the thing people always tout about college, what do you hear? You hear that people, they make the small states more powerful, right? That's what you always hear people
Yeah.
say. Yeah. And that was probably true then. Then we did some manifesting of our destiny. Maybe we did a little bit of tasteless genocide on Native Americans. Then we got some Chinese immigrants we took a lot of rights away from to build us railroads. And we expanded west and we made all these settlements that turn into states. And then all of a sudden we have 50 states because we also took an island one time. Forgot about that. And we
And
bought
we
something
have the
from
one
Russia.
that's attached to
Yeah,
Canada,
we bought that from
land
the
of
Russians, and then they didn't luck out there because we had a lot of oil. Although, admittedly, neither did the guy that bought it. He got mocked relentlessly. Seward, I think it's William Seward. He got mocked
Yeah.
relentlessly for buying what people thought was a useless piece of land, and he did. I don't think he lived to see the day where it became
He's
a
probably
real.
rolling in his grave
Oh,
now.
he'd be so mad. Imagine how mad you would be, bro. Yeah, I would not be happy if that were me. I get clowned on for like the rest of my life. Probably die still being clowned on. They probably, when I die, all the newspapers are talking about how guy who stupidly bought Alaska,
Oh yeah.
just died. LMAO is probably what the headlines were. Uh, but hey, he did get the last laugh. But yeah, so we have all these states now. And now then like World War II ends and we have this big suburban boom of these families moving and like the suburbs are created, and now like these states are sprawling with metropolitans that are huge, and it's like, this isn't just quite. I think it's kind of outside the scope of vision for what the founding fathers thought when they made the Electoral College. Um, and so now we have an issue of, well, despite what people say, the Electoral College doesn't really give a lot of power to small states. In fact, small states really aren't that valuable at all. I don't know about you, but when I'm watching the election coverage, people aren't like at the edge of their seat to see where North Dakota stands.
No, they're always talking about Florida or Ohio
Yeah,
or
the swing
states
states.
like that.
Yeah, the swing states. Because the truth is, this is the black pill. Actually, that's not. I won't get a black pill. This is the red pill, right? This is like, Morpheus handing you the pill and it's like, do you
Yeah.
want to pretend that this system works and everything is fine, everything is good, and that maybe sometimes it has unequal results, but ultimately, it makes sense. We just need to fix it a little bit. And the red pill is like, literally the only place your vote matters is in a swing state, and that's the truth of it. Because a Republican in California, vote wasted. Doesn't matter. Why do you go? But also, here's the funny part, it goes the other way too. Democrat in California, don't go. Why bother? And immediately if I say this, a lot of people have their be up in arms and be like, but wait, that doesn't make sense. If everyone had that mentality, then there wouldn't be free. And it's like, you don't understand statistics. You don't understand how math works, because there will just never be enough normal people, that will outweigh that. That just won't happen. Give me 1 second to take a drink. I've been ranting for 40 minutes. Yeah, point being, statistically, well, true, if literally everybody thought like me and then didn't go and vote because the state was already objectively won, then sure, I guess that would be the case and they might win. But, two problems with that. Number one, that's never going to happen. Enough people will always go out and vote in these big, obviously favored states that it will happen. There's just too many people who vote regardless. And second, as many people that are not voting Democrat in Democrat state or Republican in Republican state because it's obvious what's going to happen, just as many probably of the other party aren't going because, like I already said, it's kind of pointless for them too, right?
Oh yeah.
The whole thing is a little bit pointless if you don't live in a swing state. That's kind of the problem. The Electoral College is only viable, and your vote only really counts if you live in one of those. I don't even want to get into the whole thing of like, well, per person, your electoral vote is worth like a lot more in Wyoming because of its 3 electoral votes and its small population than it is in California, because that's not the point to me, right? The point to me, the core issue, it's a stupid argument, I think it misses the larger, better talking point that if you don't live in a swing state, why are you voting? Why should we be voting? Why does it matter? It doesn't, right? And so, to me, that on its own is huge. But then we get into the fact that the Electoral College has a pretty large propensity that it's showing, especially in the modern political landscape, to accidentally overturn elections. The point of Electoral College wasn't to accidentally override the popular vote. It was to try and keep sure populist candidates at bay, but it didn't envision a system where an establishment candidate like Hillary Clinton would lose because of because of like Florida going one way or something. Yeah, that wasn't the point.
Oh yeah.
That wasn't. It was supposed to be. It's the same reason the delegate system exists, and how even though the Electoral College isn't really the final system, because then we had the delegate to cast their vote, and then there's only some states have laws. I don't even know this, to where those guys actually have to vote for how the state voted in the Electoral College. There's actually a lot of systems in place to try to make it as undemocratic as possible. But the one we actually have to focus on is the Electoral College. And to me, obviously, a stupid system. Not always stupid, but stupid now. And probably will be for the foreseeable future, because polarization doesn't seem to be making the issue better. It seems to be making it worse. Like I said earlier, I don't know if you know this, the Electoral College did overturn elections a couple times in the past before, like 2000 with Al Gore Bush. They're not well known because I don't know the history exactly of them. I think one was a Grover Cleveland victory in like 1936 or something. Maybe I think there's also a Rutherford B. Hayes one that might have been the 1836 one. Sorry. But yeah, it's happened, but it's happening a lot more now. Those were like very infrequent and rare, and now I think just as many have happened in the 21st century as happened all the way before it. So it doesn't look like it's getting better. Ironically, this is an issue that has this weird level of polarization around it politically, where I don't know if you remember this, but in 2016, I remember seeing a lot before Trump won, like leading up to Trump winning, a lot of Republicans were actually afraid of this happening with Hillary, where Hillary would win the Electoral College and not the popular vote, and they were afraid that would happen. And that Trump would lose off of that. And so there was a lot of Trump supporters who were very anti-Electoral College. He also spoke out on this before when he was like candidate. I don't know if this is when he was Republican candidate or if he had already won the candidacy of the Republicans, right? But he was very outspoken against the Electoral College because, I mean, it's a pretty stupid system, and I think most people agree it is. I saw that in my polling, as however representative it is. But as soon as he won with it, overnight, you saw the shift in the polarization on the topic. You saw people go from being anti it to suddenly being very pro-Electoral College. And it comes from a practical practical standpoint in politics. If your party can only win off the Electoral College, then I guess you might that system. But if we're going to be honest with ourselves and we're going to try and pretend that we think democracy should be representative of what the people think, then come on, guy. Come on. You know.
It probably shouldn't exist, or if we have an Electoral College of some kind, it needs to exist in a different form.
It at very least needs some level of reform, because clearly, when the popular vote is like 4 million more people, I don't know if that's a conceptualizable enough number for most people. The way I like to think about millions of people is the biggest city in the entire Western Hemisphere is New York City, which has including a metropolitan population of about 8.7 million. That's a lot of people. Like I said, biggest city in the Western Hemisphere. It's more than anyone in Europe, unless you count Istanbul as Europe. Half of that. That's a lot of people. That's like we live in a town of 36,000. How many of our towns does there have to be to count up how many more votes Hillary got? It's a lot.
Oh yeah,
it's a lot. And that, sure, a lot of those are coming from states that she already obviously won. That's how that happens, right? That's how you can win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College, because you kind of got represented in states like New York and California that have a lot of population and vote your way. But I think the crux of the problem is like I'm describing, right? And if we just wanted to be actually representative of the people, we would probably just have a popular vote. Because
Oh yeah.
I don't know about you. I don't. Maybe this is just my liberal bias showing. I don't really walk around with the label New Yorker that often. I think I only dredge up that label when I'm talking about an existing state rivalry as a joke, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
I'm talking to someone from the South, I gotta bring up how my state is wealthier, how my state has better
Oh yeah.
food, how my state has better culture. It's part of the sometimes friendly
It's like
rivalry.
a banter.
It's
You
banter. I don't though feel like outside of that I identify with New Yorker all that much. I feel
no,
like
no.
I mean personally I don't really identify that much with American, but I get why people do, and I kind of do, right? I'm American, right? So I don't know. I feel like the states. I wouldn't say the states outlived their purpose, but I definitely think they've outlived their seat at the table to override the popular vote. Is my point that I'm making.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so I know we're in agreement on that, so I'm not going to harp on that much longer because I think we're almost to an hour. Yeah, we are. So I just want to quickly cover one little thing. This is one. I've realized after doing my research, this is just like a me thing. This is a me thing because I came up with this. I didn't hear this anywhere else. I just realized this one day. And I thought it was really stupid, and now I've just been harping on about it for a while now. Um, I got the same response like almost every time in my interviews. It's the presidential primaries, and I prompted it with like, don't you think it's kind of stupid that they're all on all these different days, and it artificially places a lot of like a lot of power and like specificity winning like Iowa and New Hampshire, even though those states don't matter after the primaries. They're not impactful during the presidential election. I mean, New Hampshire is a swing state, but it's still like it's like 5 electoral votes. Iowa's not much more. It's like they're not important states to like do well in. But in the primaries, they artificially boost the importance of that because the media and people just in general make this narrative about the viability of a candidate, even though a candidate is very differently viable in different states. That's just true. Certain candidates do better in other states than others. That's why during the primary system, it's not always the same person winning every state in the primary. Unless you're Donald Trump in the 2016 Republican primary, in which case you kind of are. And Marco Rubio just got Minnesota for some reason and couldn't get his own home state. Um, but
Which is that's kind of funny.
it is really funny. What's also really funny, quick side note, was Trump won in a landslide in Hawaii when at the time, you have to remember, his basically almost exclusive talking point was a border wall. I don't know what Hawaiians think is going on, but that border wall isn't crossing a half the Pacific. I don't know if they're having a lot of issues with Hispanic immigrants. I'm assuming they're not, and I'm also hoping they don't think a wall would stop that. But
We're just gonna take a plane or a boat if you want to sneak into Hawaii.
funnily enough, that's already how people sneak into America. It's not actually crossing the southern border.
Oh yeah.
Most of the people that come to America legally are actually Korean and Chinese and overstay visas. Is my knowledge. If that's still true. The last time I checked it, it was. It's not to say that a lot of people don't cross the border, but there's a lot more coming in from other ways that doesn't get talked about at all. That's besides the point. That's not the topic we're talking about. I just wanted to point that out because it was funny. And this is a podcast and should at least be a little bit entertaining. Uh, so, um, there's been a thing I've been harping on about, and I always was like, okay, so then why don't we? I know why it's like this. It's because each state has their own election committee that runs their own primaries and they set their dates and stuff. But really, why shouldn't it all be on the same day? And that's a big deal to me for some reason. Every person I asked about this was like, yeah, that does seem like an issue, but it's definitely low priority. And like, damn it, come on, just like agree that it's kind of a big deal. Come on, give me this. It's stupid. It's stupid. Why does Iowa matter? But like, okay,
no,
sure,
it
it's
is.
minor. I guess it's minor. If you're trying to compare it to all these other things, it's minor. But I definitely think, and maybe this is me coping, but I definitely think it played a big role in a lot of the last two Democratic primaries. That's probably me coping, but I definitely do think it played a role. And I think it goes untalked about, and I think it's stupid, and I hate the primaries anyways. New York is a closed primary, and that's stupid. I should be allowed to vote in the Republican primary if I wanted to, because I don't care about the Democrats sometimes. I should be allowed to do that, because I just want to do a funny Republican vote. I don't know. But point is, it's stupid. The primaries are stupid. I hate them. That's the show.